to In-House Connect's Humans of LegalTech series, where we discover and uncover the stories of the founders of the legal tech that is powering today's legal departments. I'm thrilled to have on with us today Tom Dunlop from Summize. He's the founder and CEO of Summize. Summize is the CLM that is uniquely embedded within the familiar tools you already use every day. I'm really interested to learn more about it. And folks, like consistent with our events, our webinars, if you want to network, feel free to network. If you have questions, put it in the chat. I'm gonna have a wonderful interview with my friend Tom, and then we're gonna have a live demo of Summize, and then we can have a Q&A session. If there's any questions, feel free to put it in the chat as always. So let's get to it. Tom, welcome back to In-House Connect. I think this is your second webinar. Maybe the first one was a few years ago.
Yeah, no, very was, and really appreciate you having me back on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. Got to meet you in person a bunch of times. It's been wonderful. So I want to start by going back to the beginning. You're a former lawyer, and I've got to interview a lot of legal tech founders. Most of them are not former lawyers. They're not lawyers, or they're never lawyers. You, not only were you a former lawyer, but you were in-house for a number of years.
Yeah, absolutely. And I agree. I make a joke and say that maybe it isn't as original anymore, being a lawyer and then founding a legal tech company. But I do think actually being an in-house lawyer and then actually founding a CLM is probably pretty unique. But yeah, my background started with probably the traditional route. I trained and qualified actually into a law firm, quite a boutique kind of commercial firm. And then I very early on actually had this, desire to move in-house. I think I wanted the ability to be a bit more holistic in the advice I was giving. I think I cared about the business. I cared about the effects, the advice had on a business rather than being a standalone piece of advice. So very early on, even before I was 1 year qualified, I think I made my first move in-house. I guess pretty soon I found a bit of I'm going to say it's a niche really, or a niche, I should say actually, in that I was very much focused on technology companies. I didn't necessarily have a huge background in tech as such, that the logically led to that, but I think I was naturally drawn to these businesses that felt very innovative, fast-paced, fast-moving, that I guess you could argue from a legal perspective, actually, they weren't actually maybe as challenging. So maybe the legal role wasn't as natural fit when the first start of in-house roles came to the kind of tech world. But I think I was just really drawn into these kind of innovation-led companies and how the law could be applied to that innovation in a number of different areas was key. So my kind of first role was global software company. And actually, I didn't realize at the time that I was sole GC really for that company, even though I was only a year, 2 years qualified. It wasn't meant to be like that, but someone had gone on maternity leave and never came back. So I ended up taking the kind of sole legal route. And it was a really fast growth business, global, was very much gearing up towards an exit event within the first couple of years, actually, I was there. And it was really thrown in the deep end, but I think it was a really great way to start my in-house legal career, because you really learned the business acumen early on rather than just focusing on specific legal issues. And that kind of sets up the rest of my moves in-house.
So you joined and obviously I think people can figure it out, but you're in the UK, you're UK trained, a solicitor. So you did, a year or so at a firm, and then you went to an in-house position. Actually, it's very similar to my story. My first in-house role was at a tech startup. Tech startups are, I like to say they're crazy, but they're great opportunities to learn. So I guess you got your feet wet there, and then you went to your next in-house role.
Yeah, so I went through probably another 2 or 3 after that before, founding Summize. All tech companies. One was a fintech, so a slightly different slant on it. There was a bit more regulation. I think the first enterprise software company was quite global. So I was in the US quite a bit, and we had offices dotted around the globe. The second one was a bit more UK centric, but fintech, so more regulated. I guess more of a consumer facing business as well. So one was B2B angle, the next was slightly different challenges, more on the advertising front, understanding what we could post out there, partnerships, and really maximizing the value from those partnership agreements. And then the third one, I went back into a conventional SaaS business, which was actually more of a Silicon Valley HQ. I still worked from the UK, and that was, again, one of these hyper growth companies that ended up exiting as well. So a mixed bag, but generally tech has always been pretty consistent.
Interesting. So when did you start to think about starting a legal tech company? When did the light bulb, I guess you were doing a lot of contracts? When did you decide to actually take this seriously? I can't even imagine. I personally went from practicing in-house to being an entrepreneur, but a tech company is a whole nother thing, starting that. So would love to hear more about that journey.
Yeah, I think one thing I've always said, which has been an interesting anecdote, was there's no such thing as an entrepreneur, as a post that I put out there once, which maybe it's a very British thing to say, but what I found as a stage, what I went through was almost, I got an entrepreneurial mindset first. I developed that, and then I became a founder. So I think those were the kind of two stages roughly that I feel like I went through. So the first, in terms of adopting an entrepreneurial mindset, was I was forced into this environment which was highly innovative. It was a fast growth business. You were surrounded by people who probably wanted to be entrepreneurs as well. I had access to the founder. He worked from the same office that I did. There was a huge focus on deals. This was an enterprise SaaS business, and everything was about deals, commercial language. So I think through the early stages of my career, there was quite a high involvement of deal commercial language. I had to understand what the business model was, how it works, because that was just fundamentally the only metrics that type of business is really caring about. And I think also everyone who worked in that type of business, it was quite funny. Everyone had their own kind of black book of ideas. You'd be sat there with the finance team, and legal and finance, when they get together, probably not many people would say that's going to be a huge party. But I think what I found was it was actually everyone had these like ideas about what they were going to start a business up. And I just changed my mindset quite a lot actually in that time frame. And I think I really started to think about every aspect of life. How can I do it better? What can I do better? And the obvious one, which actually probably took me a little bit of time to get to, was actually, why am I spending all this time doing this legal work the way I'm doing it and not trying to think of a more innovative way of doing it? And this was back in probably 2017, 18 as a rough time frame, where there wasn't really a legal tech ecosystem, certainly not compared to what we know today. So it's really that kind of constitutes a mindset shift to being quite entrepreneurial in my mindset. And then I guess I'm going to say the light bulb moment, because it never really happens like that, but was we actually were being acquired. I guess two things happened there. One, I saw what people made. It's enough of an incentive to maybe start to think, oh, maybe this is something that you could take a risk on. But secondly, I think I saw that my process in that was manually reviewing these PDF contracts, finding the same provisions over and over again. And I had to do that alongside my day job as a sole counsel, which was a lot. And it took me about 3 months. And I remember the moment when I spoke to my co-founder, that I guess the great thing about working in tech was I had easy access to technical people. So I went over to him and basically said, look, this is what I'm doing. Surely I can automate it. And it was that conversation that led to, and luckily he suggested some reasons as to how I could. If he said no, this wouldn't be happening. But we then worked on the idea. And I guess from there, it was quite a gradual process, but I guess that was the catalyst.
Got it. Who is your co-founder? Maybe we should have them zoom in and
No, he's coding away, Shah. That would we can't disturb him. He's locked into the matrix, so I need to stay there.
Fair enough. So I guess so you brought the vision, you had an idea for execution, and your co-founder provided the code and the actual technical aspects of that. What's like the process of going from an MVP version, a minimum viable product version, to actually testing it and getting clients? Let's talk about that. It's always interesting how you go from zero to one, to borrow Peter Thiel, but from nothing to something. It's so difficult, especially sensitive documents like contracts.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people say that the best business ideas are kind of problems that you solve, or problems you had that you solve yourself. And I think I had two things, which was a real understanding of the problem, but I also had a network of similar-minded people that were GCs or in-house lawyers that I knew would understand the problems. I guess I could very quickly test and iterate the concept, and then as we started to get, I guess, an MVP version, we could actually present it to them, and they'd have a little play around with it, probably using it was a very raw MVP, but I guess then they would say, yes, they would validate that they would use it. I think then the interesting transition is how you get someone to pay for it. And that was an interesting, I guess, there's a book actually, which is From Impossible to Inevitable. Jason Lemkin, who he's very regularly posted on LinkedIn, he's brilliant to follow. And he founded Echo Science. It's very relevant actually which is now Adobe Sign. But he's great to follow with his advice. But his book was all about getting to the first 10 customers at arm's length and how you get them to pay for it. And there's a lot of tactics and ways that you can do it. But actually, the trick for me wasn't getting validation from people that I knew, because and even getting them to pay for it, because in some ways I'm leveraging my network to do that. The trick was to get my first 10 customers that would pay that I didn't know, even though I had a connection with. I knew that the very first milestone I had to do was get 10 people who had never known me before or seen the product to pay for the products. It could just be a few £100 or £1,000. The process of payment was the key thing that for me that unlocked the kind of MVP. So that was the hardest bit. Was I guess I could get introduced to people and they might have a project on. I'd have to try and get them to go through the process of onboarding a vendor, approving spend. And the fact that as soon as I got to 10 and there was hardly any revenue, for me, that was a huge proof point. And then I was actually able at that point to get some pre-seed funding. And actually the founder of the business I talked about, the global software company, actually came in as an angel and chairman at that point as well, which is a great kind of story to round it off as well there.
That's awesome. That's awesome. When was this? When did you get your like 10th client? When did you get the seed funding and what did it look like? Was it like what it is now or was it like
Definitely not what it is now? It was, I think we actually had it and it was quite, I've seen some of the pictures of the UI at the time. Let's say Dave is a great developer, but he's not a UI. So we had red and green traffic light. It was a crazy UI. But we basically, it's about May 19-ish was when we actually got the pre-seed. So prior to that, probably 6 months to 9 months before that, we were building up some of this MVP to be able to test and get people to even sign for a trial and pay for it. So it was a year pre-COVID that we were then able to commit time to really develop what I would call a commercial version rather than an MVP.
What was the use case? What were people using Summize for at the time?
And I guess it comes to the name really more than anything else. So essentially, it was my use case. And this is the interesting thing about starting a business is one thing that everyone puts so much emphasis on is the idea at that light bulb moment. And the one thing I've learned, particularly from going through this journey, is the idea is such a small part. And what it reflects is probably a use case that I had at a very particular point in time. And then you automatically think everyone has this use case, right? And then when I went to market with it, there was, I guess in some ways we're fortunate we were selling it or started to sell it commercially when COVID hit. So all of a sudden people needed to know what their force majeure clauses were or certain provisions. So the original use case we went to market with was upload all your PDFs into this uploader. We'll summarize it and we'll be able to extract the information and basically tell you for these key provisions what's in your contract. Now, the summaries back then, bear in mind, GenAI wasn't really a thing. Were raw. It was extraction. It was us trying to create as near to natural language as we could, but the technology wasn't really there to do what we can do today. But obviously for force majeure, even just saying yes and no, was it there, was it not, was a huge leap forward from what people had. And I think that, so that's what we went to market with. So it was well timed in some respects, but what became apparent very quickly was then they were, now what? We've got this export of our contracts, but are you our contract management system? Okay, do you have a calendar? Do you have the? And we're like, oh no. And then law firms would use it, and then law firms would use it for projects, and they were like, is this a project tool? So then very quickly you pivot and you find your way and you navigate, and that's when the contract management CLM, we really leaned into that, developed some post and pre functionality, and really then the products took it from there. So it was summarizing signed contracts, and hence why we went with Summize as a name. And
that's my next question. You read my mind all the way across the pond. So you called it Summize because we can summarize all of the key provisions in your contracts, and then it grew. You needed pre-signature, probably is there work streams and all of that stuff. Interesting. Now it seems moving a little bit. It seems like the focus is now on embedding Summize within the tools that you use, uniquely embedding within the tools. So was Summize, so a couple of things, was Summize like a standalone tool before, and now it's more of an integrated tool within these various applications? Let's talk about that journey, and then like, how does it work now?
Yeah, of course. So I think almost taking a step back from the product functionality itself, I think what I realized by working in-house is that contracts as a function generally touch a lot of departments. The way that I would have negotiated a contract or created one, I could have a request from sales, it could be from development, it could be from marketing, it could be from finance. So I knew that requests would come in. They all had different types of agreements that they might want to create. I was more comfortable with some creating it themselves than others. Generally sales, I didn't really want them to do that. Probably most people resonate with. But Then again, when it went to negotiation, I used Microsoft Word. So I never wanted to leave Microsoft Word. That was my tool. And then once it's signed, then finance wants to know certain things and in terms of payment terms and everything else. So the point of that is that I guess I really understood that contracts as an instrument needed to touch a lot of departments. And actually the interaction that department had probably took place in a different tool. So sales would always Slack me, whereas finance would probably email me. I'd work in Word. They send it out in DocuSign, but they want the information back in Salesforce. So if I was to take the approach where I was to develop an all-in-one platform, which is essentially everything has to happen in legal's tool, I knew the business wouldn't adopt it. I knew that I couldn't replicate the reality of dealing with contracts in a business by adopting this tool. Oh, that was my thesis anyway, and that's very much been the ethos behind Summize. So I guess the way that Summize works and the way we developed it has always been to focus on who is having the interaction with the contract and where is that interaction taking place. And that's the first question we ask. So almost rather than just develop functionality, we focus on those questions. And then we bring the functionality to them. So to give you some examples, we have sales teams using Teams, using Slack, using Outlook, using Gmail, and they will create contracts through a little chatbot. They'll answer questions, they'll dynamically build the contracts. They don't get access to the contracts, they're very legally controlled, but the UI-wise, it's embedded in Teams and Slack. They don't ever have to go to summize.com. But yet from a lawyer's perspective, when it comes to legal, we plug into Word. I know there's a few Word add-ins now, but we were very much really early to the market with a Word add-in. We summarize, we have AI redlining, we incorporate playbooks. I think we'll talk about AI redlining some more afterwards, which we'll do a bit of a demo of. And we also have things like an AI assistant. So I describe these as a toolkit. We know that one size doesn't fit all. If I had a red flag review, I'd use some functionality. If I had a really big red line negotiation, I'd use other functionality from Summize. So we're building that toolkit that lawyers can deploy. And then the same with the CRMs. We very much understand that HubSpot, Salesforce, these kind of tools is where maybe the commercial engine runs. So we extract the information from signed contracts using our original tool, and obviously now boosted by Gen AI, create these really powerful summaries as well as extracting dates, and then we can push them into Outlook. We can also push them into Salesforce and HubSpot. So but the whole ethos of the product is always going to start with where does an interaction with the contract take place and why and who's doing it. So I think that's the fundamental difference and the ethos we have. Very
cool. I think I have so many questions. I'm really curious to see Summize in action. I want to invite my friend Johnny, because it's Halloween, October. So I'll say, here's Johnny to join us. Johnny
Hello.
will kick us off with a demo. And folks, if you have questions, I think there's a few that were sent to me. I'll serve them up at the right times. But feel free throughout the demo, if you have questions, to just pop them in the chat. So Johnny, over to you.
Cool. Thank you very much, Shai, and thanks, Tom. Tom, hopefully you'll be able to help me with some of the context around this as we explain the functionality. There's pretty much stories behind everything in a tech company like ours. But as Tom's mentioned, we focus hugely on tools that people already use. So areas where you will find contracts on a day-to-day, whether it's received from a third party or something you're drafting yourself. So I'm going to actually start off in Outlook. So a lot of contracts come by email. And this is an email, again, from myself, so you'll have to excuse me talking to myself a little bit. However, this is the typical kind of request for an NDA that you'll get on a daily basis from a third party. And let's imagine I'm like in a sales team or a project manager waiting to start a project, and the counterparty is requesting an NDA. Now, what we want to do is avoid that back and forth between whether it is a lawyer to salesperson, a lawyer to project manager going, okay, so what are the company details? How long has it got to be for? What's the purpose of this? Why are we doing this in the first place? So we allow self-service. So if, let's imagine, I'm sure we've got a lot of lawyers on the call, you have your sales team or your operations team coming in here. To generate an NDA, really simply, they can just choose an option in this little add-in they have within the email itself. So they don't have to go to another website, they don't have to go anywhere external. They can just open up this add-in and hit create. Then they'll get a list of templates that they have access to. So it might be that you have different templates in different regions for different entities or for different contract types, but everybody will get access to the relevant templates to them. Then I'm going to click on an NDA here, and This is going to basically talk me through in a kind of paint by numbers way what exists in the template, what actually has to go into the template in order to generate it. So I'm going to choose a start date here, select a term. We can support drop-down menus, conditionality, a number of different configurations. We've also got a company search. So if you're struggling to find the entity information for your counterparty, then you can find that straight from a centralized database, or you can pop it in manually. So I've got one of our demo companies pre-filled here. We've also got a drop-down field for the purpose. You could also have this as free text if you're allowing people to type into templates as well. And all we have to do is hit continue, and Summize is building my NDA for me. It's a super simple process. You'll see that this is now completed. The NDA has been created. It'll arrive in my email inbox. However, I can also check it through a little Summize screen here. So I can see what's been built for me. I can message people about it. I can collaborate on this record of a new draft that exists within Summize, and you'll see this has been built. It's a super simple process, but it's normally the first thing we set up in implementation. Everybody has NDAs, and I know everybody demos them. You'll see legal tech vendors everywhere showing you NDA processes. However, it's a huge time saver, and it's always something that's important to highlight. It's not only NDAs, we can do a variety of agreements, various different complexities as well. We find a lot of our customers using this for more complicated drafting processes where you're starting to put workflow in place, where you might be asking for some commercial information from your internal customer and then going through a process where maybe finance comes in, adds a bit to the draft, legal adds in a bit to the draft, and you go through that process, but everything is tracked and logged within Summize. So that's your contract creation piece. However, and Tom, you might be able to put some flesh on the bones with this one. As an in-house lawyer, actually you too, Shai, I imagine you were getting lots and lots of emails with various different customer and vendor terms from your wider business.
Yes, you've been generous with the email message there, because I think most people would just say FYI, or they just forward it and not even say FYI. And you'd assume that you need to review it, but never quite sure.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it's really hard to put processes in place, and very hard to put processes in place and actually make people follow them. The easiest thing really is when you receive a contract from a vendor or from a customer to hit forward and just to fire and forget to your favorite lawyer, the person that pulled something out of the bag on a Friday night a couple of weeks ago, and you're expecting them to do it again. However, that doesn't really help anyone. So what we want to do is give an even easier channel where you can really help your legal team. So again, imagine, let's say I'm in operations now and I'm purchasing some software for workflow. I've received this via email. So again, I'm going to submit a new request. I'm going to choose review because the contract already exists. We actually just need it reviewed. Then I've got lots of workflows that are made available to me. So we're purchasing some software in this regard. It's a SaaS contract. We need a review. We need some feedback. And we're asked some questions. Now, a lot of the time, people like hitting forward and just going, here's a contract. It's not particularly useful. So our customers like to put in varieties of different intake flows. What are you actually doing? What do I need to do? Is this urgent? Do I need to stay late? Or can this wait until next week? So we're getting some workflow software here. There you go. Next, we need to know whether to engage somebody else in this review. So we can automate that process. So is it over $65,000? If so, as a 3-year spend, we know it needs a finance approval. So we need to ping something off to finance to come in and approve it. Are they processing our personal data? If yes, we need to start and expedite that InfoSec and compliance process. So we need to bring them in. So instead of us having to send 3 different emails, we are automating this through a really simple workflow on the front end. And the business colleague that we're working with doesn't even realize they're engaging these different people. They're just following their part of the process. I've put a deadline in this flow. It's very controversial amongst our client base. You might want to put like a drop-down menu saying, is this kind of on fire, business critical, or not at all? Up to you. I've put a little date selector here. So the next part is obviously we need the contract, and we don't want to fire it across an email. You don't want to store stuff in your emails. It's not particularly practical. So what Summize will do is actually read the email itself and pull the file for you. So we've got this document that's come across from the email, and this becomes our master contract. If you've got order forms, SOWs, work orders, etc., that form part of the larger matter, they'll come across as linked contracts as well. And you can also pull the email as an attachment if you want to actually track this email. Now, there's not much that's useful in here, so I'm not going to do that. And then I can submit my request. And for your business colleagues, that's all they have to do to start off that process. We'll also run analytics from here. So this is the start of the flow. This is when the clock is 0, and then you can start monitoring the different contracts that are coming into you, what your SLAs are, and where contracts are getting stuck in the process through our analytics modules. Everything starts at this point with a front door in Outlook, in Gmail, maybe it's in Slack, in Teams. We support all of these different business tools.
I'm laughing because I think that priority option is dangerous, right? You give that
Of course.
the wrong salesperson, they say tomorrow, that could be a little bit rough, but this is really cool. Please continue.
Yeah. Also, with the priority side of things, what you'd probably do is you'd have some intake flows for your salespeople that are really strict and to the point, and that they couldn't choose their own deadlines. And then for more trusted business colleagues, you might have something else. But it's completely up to you. We do all kinds of different setups. The main thing is that it's SaaS based. It's all little wizard based. There's no code needed, and we really focus on that time to value for the stuff you're doing all the time. So for vendor contracts, for NDAs, all that kind of thing, start off there, and then we can build out the really complicated and much more fun stuff from our perspective. But yeah, start with the stuff that's costing you the most time. This has been fired in. However, we might get an update to this. There might be another email. We have to store another contract that's come in, another version. So we can also access our requests through the legal front door as well. I can send new contracts in. I can actually update this existing request. So through Outlook, we have a little window into the request. So me as a salesperson, I can see that there's approvals that have gone out to different people. I can see who we're waiting on. But crucially, I can also talk to my business colleagues as well. What will probably happen about an hour after you get a request, especially from sales, is they will call you up and say, is this done yet? Because actually it's critical. I didn't want to say because I don't want to be pushy. It's critical. They can send all that messages through the product, and everything is audited. It's in the right place, and you're gathering everything in the same place, so everybody can see what's going on. And also, as a legal team, you can prove that it wasn't necessarily you slowing things down, if that is necessary, which I'm sure isn't, but just in case. But they can look into the contract in here, see everything that's going on behind the scenes, and collaborate with you to get them involved as part of the process. So that's the end user experience. We also have other functionality where they can grab files. You need to send that file from the repository, or you need to send the latest version of something that's been drafted for you. You can grab files from here as well. Our next journey, and Tom will be able to talk a little bit further on this, is embedding AI searches within these kind of legal interfaces, legal front doors, so that you can ask natural language questions of your contract repository, of potentially your requests or your policies, and get answers through a chatbot within the legal front door as well. Tom, I'll let you add some flesh on the bones there.
Yeah, I think what you'll see in the next part is some of the technology we have about really pulling the kind of best data from contracts. So we have a very data-rich repository, which we automate. And when you're reviewing, I think what we are very keen to do is, again, answering that question of where is the contract interaction going to happen and who's going to say it. It's very well to store it in a repository and make it accessible to anyone who wants to go to the repository. But I think what we're finding is that the reality is someone would actually say, oh, that contract we signed with Google last year, when does it renew and what's the notice period again? And they would just either ask you that or Slack you that message. So again, what we have realized is we need to bring our technology to the front end. So part of the hopefully very imminent releases will be about actually ask the business user, will be able to ask that question through one of these kind of front doors, as we call them, and say, oh yeah, on that Barclays contract, and they'll get the answer back. So they don't actually have to go to the repository to find it. So again, it's just all about making the interaction with the contract really easy, really friendly, and tracking and embedding ourselves into the tool that it probably should have happened, that interaction.
Absolutely. And in turn, reducing the traffic between legal and the wider business, or the contract owner and the wider business that requires that information. But let's forget about your business colleagues for a second. Let's focus in on the lawyers. So as a lawyer, first of all, you need somewhere you can track all of these ongoing matters, everything that's going to be signed, arrange your work, and collaborate with the wider business. So that will happen within Summize itself. So what I'll show you first is our request screen. So you'll be able to see everything that is coming in from your wider business in one place. And depending on the workflows you set up, you might have individual views, for example, your procurement, your purchasing team, your finance team. All of the matters that you're dealing with are triaged and sent to the right people. So they can come in and they can approve different elements of them. It means that you can keep track of everything and start, again, recording analytics of what is actually going on a day-to-day basis. And everybody likes a nice graph. So in terms of analytics, we can have a look at stuff like pending requests, who's got the most work on, how are contracts performing, what everybody's different preferences are in terms of what templates they're using. And you can start to make kind of data-driven decisions based off that. We give analytics in a number of different ways across performance, across volumes, and across stuff that is pending. For example, we can see NDA creation last 30 days, sales agreements, and we can add some of these charts and have a look at the data in a lot more kind of a visual way. And this will be set up with you so you can understand what these processes actually look like and hopefully give you something you can report on a day-to-day or your next exec meeting. However, let's have a look at that matter that's come in, that software contract that we need to review. So the first thing Summize will do, as Tom says, we are very summary focused, always has been. We'll look at making a summary for you using generative AI. So we've had proprietary software to split out a contract into its different parts for a long time. So Summize always knows what's in the contract. Tom gave the force majeure example before, being able to say yes or no. We've then introduced generative AI to that. So we're allowing you to put together prompts that not only say, do you have a force majeure clause, for example, in this agreement? What events does it cover? What are the remedy periods, etc.? And then going into a lot more detail, whether it is looking at commercial terms like duration, charges, payment terms, giving termination advice, looking at governing law, liability caps, etc., breach conditions, whatever you want to see within the contract. We have a load out of the box, but you can create them yourself as well. So Summize will run that summary automatically for you. That'll give you a bit of an instant head start whenever you see something. And then for reporting post-signature becomes very useful, which we'll cover in a little while. However, you're probably going to want to redline an agreement that's come in, and you want that to be as frictionless and as easy as possible. So we had a little think about 6-9 months ago within the product team of what would be the easiest way to put together a redlining solution without having to build a load of intelligence playbooks, upload 1,000 contracts you've reviewed before, that kind of thing. What was the easiest way to do it that any lawyer could pick up and be able to work with? And we came up with the idea of rule books. So I go into our editor here, again, integrated into Microsoft Word, offline and online. We had the theory that if we asked a lawyer what they did or didn't want to be in a certain contract, they'll be able to give you a list of rules. And as we were testing this for software purchases, I asked the nearest lawyer to me, which was actually Tom, as he sits opposite me in the office. And Tom came up with 12 different rules of things he did or didn't want to be in software agreements that he was signing. And we put them in here. And what Summize enables you to do is just to write that list of rules. It will take you 20 minutes, half an hour or so. And then Summize will start to automate that review, that compliance check that you go through in your head every single time that you're looking at a contract for the first time that somebody sent you. And Summize will tell you whether something needs review. It will then find the provision for you that does or doesn't comply. And then it will show the AI reason that has been generated for the compliance or non-compliance, and allow you to check its work. We spoke to a lot of customers when we developed this, and one of the biggest thing that, and Shai actually on some of our webinars interviewing the lawyers, we've discussed this quite heavily, is the trust element of AI doing your job and making your decisions for you. So it's super important to us that this was a supervised process and that this was guided and that we were giving all the evidence of why we were making decisions. So Summize will do this compliance check, tell you if something needs review or that it's compliant, and then give you the reasons why, first of all. You'll see we've got the little thumbs up, thumbs down here. This is for training purposes. So we can then train this prompt, this process on if it's got things right or wrong. Hopefully it will get everything right first time, but if it does make mistakes, you need to be able to inform it and improve it over time. So it's an easy way to do that and put in reasons. And then the most important thing, the red lines. So all of these kind of simple red lines that you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, we knew we had to address this and put them into a contract in the easiest possible way. Most importantly, it had to be in Word. We couldn't start doing our own editor because everybody wants to work in Word. Secondly, it couldn't be like a full clause replacement. Because if you replace somebody's clause, it's quite aggressive as a lawyer and nobody likes it. And you really want AI to act and mimic a human's behavior, but supervised. So you'll see here that we have a technique where we provide what's called a surgical red line, whereby we will only remove or add the amount of text that needs to be added or removed. So what you do here is find, in this case, the term clause that is adding some information, hit insert, and then Summize via Word will redline it into the agreement for you. Now, this could be in Microsoft Word, either online or offline. You'll see it's going through that process and it's putting the red line into the document for me. There we are. And you'll just go through these and you'll check all the AI's work with even adding an edit button. So if there's stuff you want to change, for example, extra language you want to add, you can do so. You're completely in control. And you can just go through this process, finding different areas within the contract you want to assess, and then just go through and let Summize redline them for you. Again, correcting any mistakes, looking at AI reasoning as we go. Now, Tom, as a lawyer, I know this is something that you've started to use pretty much on everything you get asked to do. Not that's often nowadays because we have other lawyers within the company. But if you want to give a little bit of context on the impact this is having day to day at Summize.
I always say this is the hardest job for the product team to release features because I'm the customer as well as probably what approves what actually goes out. This is one of those releases that was meticulously planned and had to work in a particular way because I would never have used it if it worked. And I guess some of the ways that I've seen it before. So for me, this is actually, I go back 12 months, you probably would have heard me say, I don't believe in AI redlining. Fast forward to 12 months, I don't do without this now. And I think part of the thing that lawyers do is have their own internal rule book. Everyone talks about, I've been doing this for a number of years. I have my way of doing it. The great thing about this is you can codify in a really simple way what that means in just, I've created these 12 rules in 20 minutes. And now every contract, there's always going to be those 6 or 7 clauses that you have to amend to get towards your standard. You do the same 6 or 7. We're not saying you do this on every single agreement for every single negotiation point, but that time spent doing those, I say 6 or 7, it could be 10, 11, depending on the type of business. And this really fast tracks that whole process. So it's one of those tools that I get very excited about, even as much as you get excited about red lines in Microsoft Word, this still gets me very excited.
Great. Customers are finding the same now. And one of the things I didn't expect about this is since we've been giving it out to customers and customers have been playing with it and adding their own processes, it's quite fun. If you ask any lawyer, and I bet all the ones on the call now that are watching this are now going, okay, what are my 10 things? And you can note them down really quickly. We were showing this at the ACC event last week, and everybody was talking about the different haves and have-nots that they would have in certain contracts. You can have as many rule books as you want, by the way, as well. So it might be one for software purchases, one for customer agreements, one for when you're buying goods for the office. It's completely up to you how you use this. It's designed to strip out that low value work.
Johnny, we have a question in the chat.
Okay.
Where does the playbook or the redlining come from? Can you talk about that process?
Yeah, of course. So we use Azure AI models as part of our service. And then it's really up to you where that red line comes from. Here's the simple answer. So you put together your rules and then our AI service will generate those red lines for you. Now, what we decided initially was to go that way and make it super, super simple. But to accommodate much more detailed contracts, your rule could be one line, or it could be one line and your standard clause, and one line and your standard clause with a couple of different variances depending on the situation and scenario. We've also added prompt context boxes. So you can go, look, I am a lawyer working for this company. This rule book is for looking at these third-party SaaS agreements. They're mostly low value, not particularly important. However, unless one is particularly high value, maybe over 100,000 a year, I want you to go through, double check against these rules, but don't be too pedantic in the way you mark up. And you can give that context as part of this, and the tool will adjust to you. And then over time with training, it'll start to learn how you mark up and start to become much more of your system rather than an AI system over time. But yeah, we set up deliberately so it didn't need 1,000 contracts you'd reviewed before. So it didn't need a full end-to-end playbook because they take a long time to get together. The time at the start of a CLM project, you're just trying to find your signed contracts to put them into a repository, let alone having time to build a massive playbook. Obviously, there's a sliding scale, but we wanted to make it accessible for everyone.
Cool.
Awesome. So that's the redlining side of things. We have loads of AI-based bells and whistles. We have a direct integration into a generative AI system for drafting, for checks. A lot of people use it for drafting emails, whether that's internally or externally. That's your AI assistant here. However, all of your work will remain within Word. We're integrated in. And when you finish your draft, you can just save it within Summize as a new version. So Summize will pretty much keep an audit trail of everything you do within the platform. So it might be that, for example, somebody's come in, given an approval maybe on a particular task that's happened, or somebody's come in and written a message, maybe there's a new version, etc. All of that will be stored within the system and everything will be timestamped. So what Summize will do is have a record of all your contracts all the way through from pre into post signature. Now, at some point, your agreements will be signed and you'll see a signed copy here. So you can ping something to Adobe Sign, ping something to DocuSign, and then Summize will guide you through that signing process. So we'll get updates on a live basis from DocuSign, from Adobe Sign, saying where is this up to? And then once it's signed, it will just drop into your repository. So a lot of the problems that businesses have when they're implementing CLM or contract management solutions, document management solutions, is actually getting things into it. We'll do the initial migration for you. However, it's important that on an ongoing basis, something's coming directly from your e-signature tool or coming into your email inbox and then getting to your repository. That way there's no manual intervention and you're not relying on people to store things. That's how our repository is built. Go on, Shay.
A great question from Chris. Is the redline saved in Summize as a Word document? Like, where is the updated Word doc saved?
So everything's saved in Summize. So Summize, if you're working in our editor online, in Word Online, Summize will then save that version into the request that you're dealing with. So you'll have a list of drafts, version 1, 2, 3. If you're working offline, you can do all your work offline and upload your new version. We are working on some Word offline technology in order to automatically save offline versions of Word into Summize as well. Very much in the same kind of way that you might be using SharePoint, etc. at the moment. So the main thing really is keeping track of those versions. You're not losing something. You can go from your signed contract in your repository and go back and see what the initial draft looked like, what all the comments were along that road, and go into every one. They'll all be saved as read-only. Cool. So this is your repository. We do split into contract types. That's just for us to give you really precise summaries. So obviously what you want from a lease is very different from what you want from an NDA or consultancy agreement. You have a folder structure. We still maintain a folder structure. It's very useful for privacy reasons in order to hide contracts between different areas of the business. And we look at calendar events automatically. So we will log calendar events, put them in the calendar, and then notify you through both the Summize system and also via a direct integration into your Outlook calendar. So everything that's stored in Summize will also be filtered across into Outlook. And then the biggest difference really between our repository and the rest of the market is what Tom initially said. We wanted a system that summarized contracts. And when a contract's been signed, it's very important not just to know where it is, but also to know what's in it, and it to be easily accessible. So what we provide is a system whereby you can filter down by type, by a huge amount of different data points, find a specific group of contracts or an individual contract via a search, and then find what's actually in them. So for example, we've got all of our services contracts here, and maybe I don't care about who the owner is, when it was added, etc. And I want to create a really concise report, just with, let's say, a few different provisions in. I want to know when it starts. I'd like to know how long it's going to last for, and maybe what the payment terms are. And I can create these reports within Summize very easily. These can all be exported out to Excel as well. So you can create these different views and save them for regular dashboarding and reporting within the product and maintain them as you go.
Yeah. Johnny, we have a couple of questions. Sorry.
Okay, go for it.
How do you calculate the time spent in each stage, draft, review, negotiation, etc.?
Good point. So what we do is look at the actual status of an agreement. So when we're looking at negotiation, let's have a look at this one here. So we'll see that we are currently in a process of internal negotiation. It might be moving to third party, in which case we can change it out here. And Summize has logged that change within our audit trail. So we now know it's with the third party rather than ourselves. So that's one way we can look at if it's with us or if it's with them, if it's out to signature, if it's closed. However, we can also look at the tasks. So for example, you might have finance that are involved in your review process. You might have your compliance team, obviously legal, I presume, will be part of it as well. But because these tasks have been assigned and could be assigned to teams, we can see how long they're taking to be completed. So you can see how long these individual processes within your main workflow are taking. And the analytics runs off all of that information.
Got it. Next question. What kind of workflow management options are there as far as approvals, tracking, status? Is there reporting capabilities as far as review time and turnaround time, etc.?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's all managed by analytics. We have a deliciously simple, I would say, review template option with conditional tasks being able to be triggered based off what somebody's actually said during those intake questions. So you might start off the process with a very long list of questions that then finds different people within the business need to be involved, depending on the complexity, obviously. But yeah, analytics can run from that.
Okay, awesome. And is there custom workflow management options? There's different contracts require different approvals.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's all done by type and by whatever workflows you set up. They can all be completely separate. They can pick different people around the business as well. Nothing's fixed, really. We just make it easy to set up for yourselves.
Awesome. Thank you.
Cool. Say the only really thing left to show you, obviously there's loads of bells and whistles, and I personally could talk to you about AI until the cows come home, as you'll know, Shai. However, it's also important to manage contracts on an ongoing basis. So for all your final sign contracts, we have a lot of customers that are managing tasks ongoing. They're adding messages and really using this as a bit of a workbook. So if you've got a contract that's been signed, managing that renewal flow, being notified as to when various dates are coming up, both in email and within your calendar as well. And whether it's tracking covenants in finance contracts or tracking your vendors, making sure that you're not auto-renewing stuff that you're not supposed to be, all of that's done within here. We give you the capabilities to be able to add as much or as little detail to these matters as you want. The only other things to show is that if you're using a CRM system, a lot of this can be even further automated, because CRMs are full of data. So if you're creating something from, for example, Salesforce here, you probably want the information in Salesforce to be used to either populate a template or populate a request. And that can all be done through Summize. So Summize will find the right information to populate templates in Salesforce, to pull in contracts that have been stored in Salesforce, and then send them to your legal team with the right kind of contextual information around deal close date, around products that are being sold, whatever you need. And then signed contracts can also be available as well. So if you're day-to-day in Salesforce rather than Summize, you probably want a record of what contracts are actually sitting in the Summize repository under that company. So we can sync all of that across. Same with HubSpot, the same functionality is available. But yeah, we want to make contracts accessible via a number of different areas. The only other integration to mention is, just because it's been really useful for a lot of our clients quite recently, we're starting to see a number of businesses who have already got a system set up in products like Jira for ticketing. So you might already have a legal request system. You're like, how Summize is going to interact with that? We can actually integrate into Jira flows as well. So Summize sits as part of a ticket. So you go in and you'll be able to see with a ticketing process, any Summize information. We can then reuse Jira fields as part of the request as well. And then you can monitor different requests as part of your Jira process as well. But yeah, we aim to be able to find you wherever you are, whichever part of the business, I think is the takeaway from myself and Tom.
We have another question in the chat about Salesforce, and what's the estimated time frame of implementation, particularly if there's an integration with Salesforce?
Okie doke. So for implementation with Salesforce, obviously Salesforce depends on what your Salesforce processes are. From working with Salesforce over the last year, they can be very different, completely different. So depending on what you're looking to do and what kind of processes you're in place, what we'll normally do is implement Summize first. implement Summize first, and then we can layer the Salesforce processes on top. That way we can start off with your legal and project teams and then branch out into your sales team as well. Salesforce takes a bit of install work. Normally the whole thing's done within a week. It's a package that needs to be installed. And then it's just a case of using the workflows that you've already got set up, so the templates you've already got in Summize, and then just mapping that data to the relevant Salesforce data.
Awesome.
In terms of overall implementation, you'd be looking at anywhere between about 6 and 12 weeks altogether.
Got it. Got it. Please continue. I have a bunch of questions myself, but I don't want to short circuit or I don't want to.
No, not at all. Not at all. That's all I was going to show you today. So any questions you have, feel free to jump on.
Okay, folks, if you have more questions, please put them in the chat. And thank you everybody for participating and for tuning in. So when it comes to implementation, is there like a customer success partner that is part of the onboarding who like helps shepherd the customer through and make sure everything runs smoothly?
Absolutely. So they'll either be a Mancunian in Manchester or Boston. My point being, depending on how good understanding Mancunian is and where you're located, you'll get a team in either location. So what they'll do is walk you through the process. You'll start off with our implementation team. They have a hero methodology for implementation and they work in sprints. So they'll look at your use cases, map out, and then we'll go either in parallel or sequentially and walk through your different use cases so you can get value as soon as possible. And then afterwards, you'll pass to customer success and you'll be given lots of product releases to test. Well, definitely been the case in the last kind of 3 months or so, getting feedback from you on the latest and greatest advances. And then you'll work with us over the years, hopefully as a partner, and advise us on what lawyers really want, because we need to stay connected to that.
Awesome. Awesome. I want to talk about, and we only have a few more minutes left. So any questions, put it in the chat. Let's talk about pricing and seats and how that works. Can you talk about that?
Yes, in a limited way. It's not my area of expertise commercially. However, in terms of licensing, it is very much bums on seats. So we'll have your legal power users, people who are reviewing contracts day to day, normally focused around kind of legal, finance, procurement. They will be your main license. And then everybody who's coming in on the odd occasion to be part of reviews, maybe doing approvals, we call them collaborators. So they might be your directors of sales, different people potentially in your finance team as well. They'll be the collaborators. They'll have a kind of a lower level of use. So they'll have access to the main platform. However, they've got limited functionality. Then we have your requesters, and that could be pretty much anyone around the business. So we'll give you a big batch of requester users to give to your wider business, basically anybody that's sending you regular contract requests. And they'll mainly access through whichever legal interface they're sitting in, whether it's Outlook, Gmail, Salesforce, etc.
And I guess it's based, each seat is X. Do you have a ballpark? Let's say it's hard, right? Everything is different. I guess.
Yeah. Our sales guys would probably shoot me, so I'll dodge that question. However, that's just because it varies as to what your use cases are, how many teams, etc. If you're interested and you want some kind of ballpark pricing and a quote, just get in contact with us and one of our sales team will be able to give you that advice.
Okay, cool. I guess we'll wrap up here. Tom, Johnny, any last remarks before we sign off for the day?
Nothing from me, no. Thank you, Johnny, for making me demo the products. Appreciate it.
No worries. Lovely support. Thank you, Shai, for arranging everything. Anything you want to know about Summize, feel free to reach out to us directly.
Okay. All right. Wonderful. It was really cool to see Summize in action. I see why you've gotten so much traction. It's a great tool, really easy to use. And I love that it's where you need to be or where you want to be, right? You don't have to go anywhere else. It's really nice. It was wonderful to see it in action. Thank you so much, Tom and Johnny. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. And if you're interested in getting a demo or learning more, you can let us know. We'll also reach out to everybody. We're happy to facilitate that. I hope everybody has a wonderful Wednesday.